Shalom and welcome to the Wild Branch Ministry. I'm Brad Scott, and this is God is Smarter Than We Are, and we are in a continuing series as these last couple of programs and so forth has begin to wind this thing down. I'm hoping, as I said in previous shows, that I have beaten this dead horse enough that the evidence that I'm presenting will at least be part of your gathering of understanding of who these characters are in the last day. And I think it is important. As I said before, I think I've had a tendency in the past to kind of relegate this to, those insignificant, unimportant things. But the more I saw what was going on in the world, the more I could see these opinions given by the way, well-respected men. Where we say, the Steve Quayles and the Tom Horns and Chuck Missler. For example, one of my favorite mentors is Chuck Missler. Some of you know who I'm talking about. But then there's people like Steve Quayle and Tom Horn, very respectable men. I mean no disrespect to them. I just disagree with them. And so, because I know a lot of these things are very titillating and they have a tendency to bring out something that's kind of part of our Adamic nature, I could say. It seems like humans like the idea. There's something about our old nature. I don't believe it's our new nature, but there's something about our old nature that kind of likes the idea of it not being out of my control, or that we're powerless to stop it. I think that's the reason why horror movies are so popular and things of that genre, space things and aliens and things like that. E.T., Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Star Trek, Star Wars, things like this. They like the idea of things being out of control and being scared half out of their wits in horror movies. And there's something about our Adamic nature that appeals to. And so we have a tendency to gravitate toward that. And I think rather consciously, because I think sometimes there are men that consciously set out to reap the financial benefits or benefits with respect to reputation, whatever case may be, deliberately teaching these things, and because they realize that these kind of things sell. They sell a lot of books that freak people out and bring out really weird stuff. Sells a lot of books. That is absolutely true. But I think that's an appealing to our Adamic nature. And I think that our Father wants us to know that we can turn from our wicked ways. Isn't that what 2 Chronicles is all about? If we turn from our wicked ways, he will hear from heaven and he will heal our land. Is that passage not true anymore? I don't know. I'm involved in all this as much as the rest of it is, but I'm not just going to concede to these things, and I'm just going to do the very best I can to withstand things that are out of our control. That's just one of my fundamental beliefs. And so we've been talking about these kings and rulers of the earth and so forth with respect to what's called the one world government, the New World Order and so forth. And so this is something that's been from the very beginning. The idea of taking over parts of the world. As I said earlier, it's the theme of James Bond movies. It was always someone's out to take over the world. That was basically the theme, at least of the first 4 or 5 Bond movies, is fighting somebody that's going to take over the world. The guy rubbing the white cat and so forth. And so I believe one of the places this started was in Genesis chapter 4, verse 22, when it says that, speaking of the line of Cain, it says, and Zillah also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah, and so forth. And so one of the descendants of Cain is a character called Tubal-Cain. Now, we've talked in the past, and we will at a later subject as we revisit, I believe, the whole Hyksos idea in some future programs. But we've defined the idea of Cain being to purchase or to possess, to take, to get. Take, get, possess, purchase. All those kind of terms are associated with Cain's name. But then he has a descendant called Tubal-Cain. Tubal, Tet Bet Lamed, from the Hebrew roots Tet Bet Lamed, if you will. And Tav Bet Lamed. And that is a word that's translated in your Bible as the world. Translated as the world. I think maybe it is Tet Bet Lamed. Okay, having said that, you can look it up yourself. To take over the world. And so the combination of those two worlds is take over, possess the world. And so from the very beginning, we've gotten this idea of people who want world control, world domination, and so forth. This is seen from the very beginning. And so I just wanted to highlight that before we moved on. Now, last time we were talking some examples of David Rockefeller, if you remember, just coming right out with it, based upon this MO from the very beginning of the enemy, hidden in plain sight. Let's throw it out there, mix it up with all the other goofy stuff, and just consider them all the same kind of thing. Therefore, we give no attention to these things. And so, but these things have been around a long time. The idea of this world takeover through the Illuminati and organizations like that is not something that just surfaced here in the last 50 years or even 100 years. But back in the 1700s, for example, there was a letter written from our president, George Washington, to another character by the name of George Washington Snyder. Just a coincidence that they both have very similar names. So it's a letter written in October 24, 1798. This is the transcription of it. And it was written from our president, George Washington, to a guy named George Washington Snyder, based upon this rumor out there that the Masons were a branch of the Illuminati. And so, now, I want you to remember, the reason I'm reading that is because not whether they are or are they not, because I believe they were, okay? It isn't whether they were or not. It's just the fact that they're addressing, that they're talking about it. Something similar to that I brought up in past programs, that just because you quote something doesn't mean it's true, but the idea is to show you that this dialogue was going on in those days, and it's not something that just surfaced here recently. Here's the letter, and I quote it. It says, remember, this is George Washington, our president. "It was not my intention to doubt that the doctrines of the Illuminati, the teaching of the Illuminati, and principles of Jacobinism," which we'll talk about at another time, won't be here, "had not spread in the United States." He's conceding that these teachings, these things of the Illuminati, this whole world takeover, had spread in the United States. But then he goes on to say, "On the contrary, no one is more truly satisfied of this fact than I am. The idea that I meant to convey," he was misunderstood in a letter, "was that I did not believe that the lodges of Freemasons in this country had, as societies, endeavored to propagate the diabolical tenets of the first," that would be the Illuminati, "or pernicious principles of the latter, if they are susceptible of separation." And so forth. So, once again, the purpose isn't whether George Washington, the president, was even right. That's not my purpose of bringing this up, because personally, with hindsight, I don't believe he was. I don't believe he understood the whole point behind all of this. But apparently he had written something that was misunderstood, and so he writes this letter to explain that he's not saying that the Illuminati isn't present and their teaching isn't present in the United States, and this is a reality that's happening, just like all the world, or the rest of the part of the world has accepted that. What he's saying is, because he was a Freemason, because George Washington was, what he's saying is that we, the teachings of the Lodge, have nothing to do with these pernicious things that are going on and these teachings of the Illuminati. That's what he was saying. I just wanted to bring out the fact that he understood that that was a reality at the time. And so there are purposes of the New World Order, and it's been established from the very beginning. And all these who are leaders, have been part of this organization, have had the same goal in mind from the very beginning. And this thing I'm proposing to do was passed down from the very beginning. So I believe there is one character. The reason why you see very similar things going on and connections throughout the centuries of this is because it actually only comes from one entity. That serpent, if you will, that bad guy, whatever you want to call him, from the very beginning. And so the idea is that he knows that this is not going to be accomplished by necessarily the first generation or the second generation or the third generation. He knows that there's going to take some time for some empire building, if you will. And so, because some people say that, it's hard for me to believe that this group and that bunch of people are all involved in this worldwide conspiracy to take over the world, which they haven't done yet, if it didn't even happen in their lifetime. Some people say it's hard for them to believe that this is going on because it just doesn't seem like human nature to them for people to go to all this trouble, to do all these schemes and so forth, and this conniving, knowing that it's not going to be seen in their lifetime. The fruition of it is not going to happen in their lifetime. So that seems against human nature to them. But here's my point, and I think you know it as well, that they're not in charge of this thing. They're not in control of this thing. And so even in the past, when we see various organizations, world organizations, that actually don't like each other, but when it comes to gathering together to destroy a single enemy, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Maybe you've heard that expression before. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. When it comes to conspiring together for something to happen, they're all going to come together, because a lot of these organizations that are even part of this system weren't necessarily in the public working with each other, but they all come from a single background. They're all part of one single source of what the Bible says is going to happen in the end times, whether we like it or not. And all these kings and all these counselors and all these rulers are going to gather together to stand against Yahweh and His anointed. They may not all in the past know that they're working together for this common goal. They all have their purposes, but they all have a common enemy behind them who in the last days is going to be pooling these things together. That's why it's so imperative that now, more than any other time in history, the people of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob need to be one. If there's ever a time in the history of mankind we need to be one, it's now. We live in those times, I believe, very similar to the first century, in which you had various people that didn't even like each other, didn't even a fellowship with one another, or weren't even involved with each other, who all came together at one time for a single purpose: to hang Yeshua on that tree. That even though in the past they may have not have liked each other and they may have been enemies, Jews not want to have anything to do with non-Jews, factions within Judaism not liking each other, Sadducees, Pharisees, House of Hillel, House of Shammai, whatever the case may be, all working against each other, all doing their own thing. But yet when it came to that one single moment, they all came together because it was, there were multitudes out there conspiring against. Rome was no friend of the Jews, you know that, but they all worked together, okay? And we're talking about those who were the hierarchy among the Jews, not Jews, okay? But those mighty ones from among their midst who did not have the best interest of the people in mind and exalted themselves and their words above everybody else. I don't want my words to be confused. I love Judah with all my heart, because that's the heart of the Father, okay? I'm talking about those who are working within it, who are not really of them. They came out from among us because they were not of us in the first place. And so I believe the same thing is happening right now, that various organizations across the world that are all part of the goals, working in their various ways for their various own self-interest, are now collectively coming together to stand against a common enemy. And that common enemy is going to be the seed of the woman. Now, I said the seed of the woman because, once again, it's those with God's seed in them that's the enemy. Not just those who have the physical seed of Judah or Jacob in them, but the prophecy in the beginning is to, I believe, his purpose is to take out the seed of the woman. And as you well know, historically, there's been various ways that was attempted through Moses and Herod and various other places to take out, get Yeshua to cast himself off, whatever, to take him out so he doesn't go do what the scriptures prophesied he was going to do. And so all these things are coming together for such a time as this. So while these organizations are coming together as one against a common enemy, us, all of us who have the seed of the woman in them, what are we doing? We're dividing ourselves over every issue that you can possibly imagine. As a matter of fact, I'm going to propose to you that in the whole Hebrew roots messianic thing, we have a much greater imagination on what we will divide ourselves over than we did when we were Christians, or than Christianity is. Why? Because now we have 39 more books we can argue and divide over. I mean, in our past, we basically, well, we're New Testament believers, so we argued and fussed over, the 27 books, Well, speaking in tongues is evidence of the baptism of the Holy Spirit. The person say, no, speaking in tongues is straight from the devil, so forth. And so we argued about all these things. And now, we're in this walk, now we understand the validity of the Tanakh. So now we have 39 more books that we can divide over. And so we have a much greater imagination on things to divide ourselves. I say this to our shame. I say this to our shame because this is the time when we need to be one. And we are going this way while the enemy's coming this way for just such a time as this. Now, I said all that to say this, that even though these various organizations have their own special interest, the environmentalist organizations do not have specifically the same interest and so forth as Lucis Trust or the Freemasons or whatever, but they all consciously or unconsciously are working toward the same goal. And that, of course, is world domination, one world government, to get rid of all these things that cause auto-determination, which we talked about last time in the quotes of David Rockefeller. That's the whole idea of the enemy, is that people do not have the freedom to determine their own destinies, but that the system takes over to rule and so forth. So there are very similar worldwide goals of what we call the New World Order. And there's basically a handful of them. I'm sure you're familiar with them, but I'm going to read some of them to you anyway. These are basically and fundamentally, they're smaller groups that can branch off of these things. But these are the general stated goals of the whole New World Order. Goal number one, the abolition of all ordered governments, as if that's not obvious anyway. The abolition of ordered governments is number one. Now, in other words, we need one world government. We can't accomplish this if there's different governments over different people with democracies versus dictatorships, etc. Number two, abolition of private property. I'll read them and then we'll come back and talk about it. Abolition of private property, abolition of inheritance, abolition of patriotism, abolition of the family, abolition of religion, a global population of 500 million people, and creation of a world government. Now, let's talk about these things very briefly, one at a time. Abolition of all ordered governments, which of course is closely related to the creation of a world government. Because you're not going to have a world government, once again, as long as you have democracies. Democracies in particular have to go. Well, of course, I'm well aware of, just as you are, that technically the United States was never designed to be a democracy in the first place. We were designed to be a republic. And that was, of course, based upon past, if you will, Roman governments and Greek governments as well, in which the senators and congressmen and so on and so forth. But we weren't designed to be a democracy. Democracy is the people rule. The whole idea is the people don't rule. It's only a certain, not the people, not the peons, not the lowlifes in the world, if you will, those who are work in the field and get tan, but the powers that be are to run things. Well, they can't do that as long as there is a United States. That's one of the reasons why I am determined, if the Messiah tarries in these next few months, that I am determined to revisit what I feel, at least prophetically, and this is a shameless promotion, and I'm sorry I'm doing this, okay? But from the Wild Branch in particular, the series that's called The Restrainer from the Beginning, the wheat and the tares, otherwise known as The Restrainer Revealed from the Very Beginning. When I say The Restrainer, I'm talking about that the Restrainer, I believe, is the New American Standard Version, or word that's used. Other versions, like the King James, says that he who withholdeth or he who letteth will continue to letteth. You love King James, and Kelly's taken out of the way. So I'm talking about this character in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. I did this under a series called Esau and so forth 10 years ago or more, and now I'm revising this, and this is hopefully what I'm going to do in a future program, because the conditions of our world right now. And I want to talk about a lot of things I talked about there and revisit those things, because I think those things are happening right in front of our very eyes right now. And just without getting into the details of this, my point is something that I believe a lot of us are beginning to realize, without getting too political here. And that is, there used to be a time in our government, in our country, in which we had Democrats who had a liberal ideology on how to make America successful. And we had Republicans who had a conservative ideology on how to make America successful. That is gone. That is no longer exist anymore. I don't want to get into too much detail here, but now we're facing a challenge in which the powers that be right now are out to take America down. And everything, I know I'm saying something most of you already know, but the idea is every arrangement is designed to take America down. That's the purpose of it. And so it's going to be under the guise of fighting against the Republicans, and the Republicans fighting against the Democrats. Just like you saw, I showed in a couple of shows again. You got Obama on the right, and you got Romney on the left, and you got the Catholic priest in the middle, okay? And so it's under the guise of one thing, but what's really happening is they're both working together to take down the system. They're giving the appearance that we're having this battle and this fight over every little thing. And I don't believe it's every single person either, do not get me wrong. But I think that is the bill of goods we're being sold right now. And I think I've also said this in the past, and I'll say this later as well, that when it comes to identifying the bad guy in the end, I think we're making a mistake by approaching it from what I call a Greek or a Western point of view. And that is, remember that thought process that everything is either this or it's that. And because we get trained in Western thinking to think that everything is either this or it's that, as I said before, all we got to do is condemn the that, and the this must be right by default. And so therefore, we set out to condemn everybody else, and we don't prove our own position, because if there's only two and the other one's wrong, well, then mine has to be right by definition. And I think that's part of our problem. And I think it's a mistake right now, still right now, even as advanced as we are. And the last time I said this, because the first thing this thing I'm about to say now is something I said in the Esau thing 10 years ago. And that's at that time, and I still believe even at this moment that I'm speaking, that it is a mistake to conclude that the bad guy is only this person or only that person. I think that's a mistake. And the reason why I think so is because I'm going to admonish you to do something in your spare time. I'm going to admonish you that go on the internet. I know that's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but go on the internet and Google Islam/Antichrist. Go Google that, Islam/Antichrist. And I would say spend an hour or two perusing all the websites and so forth that have the teaching that Islam is the Antichrist. And after about a couple of hours, I almost guarantee you will be absolutely convinced that Islam is the Antichrist. And now when you're done doing that, I would suggest that you take a break and go have a cup of warm tea. Have some chamomile or something tea, something to, put some lavender in it, let it calm down and so forth. And then come back to the internet and now Google Roman Catholic Church/Antichrist and peruse those websites for a couple of hours. And I can almost guarantee you after a couple of hours, you're going to go, well, I was wrong. Islam is not the Antichrist. The Roman Catholic Church is the Antichrist. Now, here's the next thing I suggest you do. Go back and take a break again. have some more tea, calm down, and now come back to your computer and Google Freemason / Antichrist, Illuminati / Antichrist, I don't know, Henry Kissinger / Antichrist, whatever. And you're going to be like a pinball in a pinball machine, bopping forth all over the place. You're going to be all over the map, if you will, blown about by every pinball, okay, of doctrine. Because the reality is going to be the reason why you could find evidence of all of those, abundant evidence, and I guarantee you can. Put anybody you want to and put / Antichrist and look it up, and I'm going to guarantee you're going to find abundant evidences of every one of those. And the reason why, at least as I understand at this point, is because they are involved in every one of those things that I just named. Every one of them are involved in what I just said. And so, of course, since every one of them are involved, you're going to find evidence of every one of them. And so we got to stop fighting and bickering and separating on who we think he is and so forth, being confident of that. And then that person comes and goes, and now what do we do? And so I think all of those are going to be true at the same time.
Want more Brad Scott? Get his teaching Agrobiolinguistics, God's Signature on Creation, now available at HebraicRootsNetwork.com.
So not only do I believe that there's abundant evidence of all these because they're all involved in it, but when we do that, we have a tendency to lead people into thinking that, well, for example, let's just use an example. Going through the process of showing that the bad guy has to be a Jew. Antichrist has to be a Jew. And so, the forefathers, he did not worship the God of his fathers. You know the passage I'm talking about. And so when you convince people that it has to be a Jew, then nobody's looking for a Gentile. No one's looking for, a non-Jew, if you will. Or if on the other hand, you convince everybody, no, it can't possibly be a Jew. It's got to be a Gentile. Well, then you're not looking for a Jew, if you will. You're looking for a non-Jew. Same is true. Oh, he's got to be black. Well, then you're not looking for white people. He's got to be white. You're not looking for black people. And so you severely limit where to look and so forth when we do that kind of thing. So I just simply think that is a mistake. Okay, back to our context here, now that I've gotten that off my chest. We talked about the abolition of ordered governments. Doesn't mean they can't be a disordered government. So the idea is we got to take these things down. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, remember over a year ago, we had this little thing called the Arab Spring. I don't know if y'all remember that. But it was at that time, of course, that the government of these Middle Eastern countries that surround Israel started coming down. Now, up until that time, they had governments. It was an ordered government by dictators. And so, since we already have demonized the word dictator, and we should, do not get me wrong, do not misunderstand what I'm saying here. Dictator is not a good thing. But we demonize the word dictator. And so therefore, whatever it takes, we have to do to get the dictators out of these countries. But the powers that be knew that what differentiates the people that they wanted in government with dictators is that dictators are called that because they want all the power to themselves. That's why they call them dictators, or that's at least part of it. We want, as a matter of fact, dictators, not because of the fact that they're all for one and everybody for me kind of thing, that they will nosy up, if you will, to other governments in order for them to have money and power, in order to bring in the money. So certain dictators would nosy up to the American government in order to get money, in order for America to send money for missiles and weapons and military, whatever the case may be. So the powers that be knew that dictators are out for themselves. They're not for the cause. They're not for the NWO, the New World Order. They're not for what's going to be happening in the world. And so I'm going to suggest to you that the Muslims, for example, knew that the problem with Libya is that Gaddafi is a dictator. And so he's not cooperating with the overall plan because it doesn't give him the stuff. That's the nature of a dictator. It's the nature of a Mussolini or whatever the case may be. And so these governments that were run by these dictators start falling one at a time, and you know what I'm talking about. And of course, the United States cooperates in the same thing, if you will, by saying, well, we're going to get rid of these nasty, mean, terrible dictators, and we're going to put in a democracy. We actually said several times that there's going to be democracies put in the place of these dictators. And so here's our opportunity to come in and help these people to take down this dictator in this country so we can put up a democracy. And of course, as you well know, the Muslim Brotherhood ends up taking over these countries. That was the plan in the first place. I'm going to propose to you, this is always the MO. One of the MOs. I've given several examples of how I think the enemy works from the very beginning, which comes from the beginning. I think that his method has always been that when let me see if I can put it to you this way. When he wants B, he wants this. Let's say this point. If we had a chart and had a dot on the chart, this is what the enemy wants. Here's where we are right now. And he wants to take us from here to here. I think he knows that he's never going to convince us to go from here to here. This is good. This is bad. This is good for us. This is not so good for us. And so what he does is he presents a scenario that he proposes way over here. He proposes something way over here. This is how we get legislation passed many times as well, my friends. Okay? We propose some sort of outrageous thing to the government that be, whether it be Republicans and Democrats, it makes no difference. And so then we all fight and we hassle about it. We got to compromise. You got to give a little. We got to give a little. And they present this idea of fighting and arguing and fussing with one another, that we're all trying to do the right thing. And then when they get done and say, okay, finally they conceded. Finally they compromise. Finally, this is what people should do. We should compromise and we should balance this thing out. And they go back to here. And so they agree on here, when there is where they wanted to go in the first place. But they knew they couldn't get the people to go from here to there. So let's propose some outrageous thing over here, and we'll concede and concede and concede and concede until we get to where we wanted to go in the first place. That's the problem. I'm starting to rant here. I'm starting to vent a little bit. I'm sorry. These are trying times that we live in. And so this is the point of the abolition of all ordered governments as well. The abolition of private property. Obviously, one of the things that's clearly going to stand in the way is people on their own land with their own stuff defending their property. And not only defending it, but using things to defend it that's also their property, you know, like guns and so forth. And so the idea is to slowly whittle away at the guns. And that's the reason why they'll start out with a proposal. And they'll say ludicrous things when it comes to gun control. They'll say that, well, what about a guy that's got a tank? A tank, and so forth. Does that mean that the average person should have a tank? And they talk about all these weapons that mow down, hundreds of people at a time and so forth. So in the gun control thing, their answer to the problem is to jump way over here. We do the same thing with even issues like abortion and so forth, to outlaw that. We give examples. So you're trying to tell me that when a man rapes another woman, and it's always a black guy. When white people talk about abortion, they always use a black guy. When a black man, what happens if a black man rapes your daughter? Why isn't it just another white guy? Okay, but anyway, we always use those kind of things because they're human, and that's the way we think. And so you mean to tell me that we should keep the baby when there's a rape? And so they use the infinitesimally small example, of women getting raped to actually make the whole thing of abortion legal. They're always jumping to the extremes to get us to concede, well, no, we're not talking about that, and eventually end up here, and there's where they wanted us in the first place. And that happens all over and over and over. So they're doing the same thing with the guns. And so guns are what we use to protect private property. So they got to get rid of the private property. So I'm going to suggest to you that, I know I'm saying some bizarre things here, but do you think you really own your land? You think you really own that lot that you paid X amount of dollars for, and you pay property tax on that every year? I'm going to propose to you that we don't really own our own property, because we owe gazillions of dollars to the Chinese, for example. And the Chinese know we don't have gazillions of dollars. We don't have any money. Our government knows we don't have any money. Their government knows we don't have any money. And so in response to all the things that we've been exporting out of China to here, we haven't been paying for it with money. Why? We don't have any money. What do you think we've been paying for it with? So I'll just leave it at that. Abolition of private property. Abolition of inheritance. That kind of goes in with the private property kind of thing, that to get rid of inheriting things from your parents, passing things down, houses, land, property. Like I said, that kind of goes along with the other things from one generation to the next. Abolition of patriotism. Of course, that's got to go. And of course, the best way to do that is to redefine what patriotism is. We've known for a long time what patriotism is, but we have let certain elements in this culture redefine that for us. When we have certain people say that just because I don't want to support the military, that I don't want to have a good, strong national defense, and just because I don't want to do this and don't want to do that doesn't mean I'm not a patriot, okay? And so we slowly whittle away in what it means to be a patriot and so forth until we've redefined it. And the idea of redefining it is to take it out of something specific and turn it into something ambiguous that you really can't put your finger on. That's the whole point of politically correct language and redefining terms, is because the terms used to mean something and everybody knew exactly what those terms mean. But over time, we redefine them. We call it being politically correct. And the idea of political correctness is always the same: to turn a specific term into a general term, which could mean and include anything and everything. That's the idea of it. I just gave an example earlier. Abortion used to be the term that we used many years ago, and some people still try to use it and so forth, but the powers that be have been trying to shift it, okay, to family planning and things like that for a couple of decades now. Why? Because, we all know when we hear the word abortion, we all know what that means. As a matter of fact, it's almost an onomatopoeic word, which is just a fancy word for saying the way you say the word sometimes describes what it is, like bang and ouch and words like that. Abortion, even the way we say it kind of implies. So everybody knows what it means, that word means. So we change it to another word, which means it more general. And so it goes from abortion to family planning. So family planning actually really means unfamily planning or family unplanning or some kind of thing like that. And so we do that all the time. We at first, when the towers fell down, if you remember in 2001, it was Muslims. Well, Muslims was too specific, particularly Arab Muslims. And so Arab Muslims was too specific. Oh, we can't have that because that points to a specific group of people. And even though it was a specific group of people that did it, we, God forbid, can't call them that. And so we'll change it to Islamicists, and so forth, and words like that. Militant Islamists. Okay, I'll get that straight. But that was too specific as well, because it still contained the word Islam. Okay, so we had to get rid of that. So let's call them extremists. Yeah, that's it. Extremist. So we went from something that was very specific and we all knew who it was. So we take it over to a word that means different things to different people. As a matter of fact, my friends, you and I, under that definition, could easily be under the category of extremist because of what you and I believe. That was the purpose all along. That's the reason why I believe our Father is bringing us back to the beginning. Why he's restoring all these things. Why he's turning a pure language back to the people. To the people, notice, is because to go back, because in Hebrew, all words are very concrete and very in your face, and you can taste them and touch them and feel them and smell them, as I said so many times before. And so it's specific. You can handle it and you can see it. But over time, the words become abstract and they mean different things to different people. That's the whole idea of being politically correct. I think many times our modern versions of our Bible are just put in politically correct language. So it blurs the line of things, and so it can mean whatever you want it to mean and things like that. And this is part of it. So abolition of patriotism. The best way to get that is not going to be accomplished by having the president come on TV and say, okay, from now on, we're going to arrest all the patriots. All you people who are patriots, we're going to come and we're going to put you in jail. What needs to happen in order for this to occur, to come into fruition, is that we redefine what the word patriot means, who a patriot is. That's what we need to redefine. The abolition of the family, I think, is obvious, because with family, there's emotion and blood ties. There's a connection to something that may hold more power. Blood is thicker than water, for example, that may hold more power and strength than the loyalty to something outside the family. The loyalty to a governor or a president or some sort of political leader or dictator. Family will be stronger than that. So the idea is to slowly whittle away, erode away at the family, little by little. So you got to get rid of this family attitude. Abolition of religion is along the same lines as family. That not only is family a more stronger emotional tie than it would be to a government, but a person's religious values would also be a stronger tie than the dictators and the leaders that be as well. So you got to get rid of the family or the religion as well. You got to blur that. How do you do that? Blur it. Redefine what that word actually is. A global population of 500 million, perhaps some of you have heard that. Remember, this is all part of what's going on today, and I'm just proposing to you that that's been the MO from Genesis chapter 6 on. In various cultures at various times, we could quote all the Genghis Khan and all the Pol Pot and Ho Chi Minh and Mao Zedong and all these leaders, these dictators of these countries who slew and killed and murdered their way to power for greed and so forth. And that's the reason why people concern me most of all. And I'm just maybe going to ask you a rhetorical question. And I don't mean to sound too sarcastic, but I want you to just think logically. Which one of these two scenarios is the one that affects you the most? Is centuries and centuries and centuries of men choosing whatever they want to do with respect to everything in life, including their mates and their wives and blah, 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 and the subsequent heartache and death and destruction and separation and estrangement from children and depression and poverty and all the things that results from men doing what they want to do? Has that affected human lives more over the centuries, or fallen angels and these demons that are wandering around the earth? I'm not talking about the influence of those things. I know it comes forth from that. But giants, fallen angels, are those the things that have plagued us the most in your life? Let's don't go throughout the centuries. You think of your own personal life. Which has affected your life more? The things that people do in your life? Or are you struggling with fallen angels every day? Are you struggling with giants wandering through the land, mating with your daughters and things like that? I'm only posing the question. Which seems more logical? Okay, having said that, and having thrown in a bit of sarcasm, we all know that the purpose, of course, is to whittle down the population of the world down to around 500 million. I believe someone named Ted Turner said that a decade ago or so. Of course, that is quite obvious. We're up to over 7 billion people in the earth right now. And so obviously some 6.5 billion people are the wrong kind of people. They're not the intellectual elite. They're not the leaders. They're the ones that are actually keeping this new world order from coming into fruition. In other words, there's too many people like you and me out there who have a private property, inheritances, and patriotism and families that we're close to, and are religious I'm using that word, you know what I mean, our values of our trust in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So we're the ones standing in the way. So that's got to be whittled down to 500 million of the elite of the world. Some people from a spiritual point of view see that that's when man will take another quantum leap into another existence in which, the white people will rule the world and so on and so forth, okay? And of course, the last one is directly associated with the first one. The creation of a world government can't happen until all these other things are done away with, okay? Now, with that in mind, once again, these things are out in the open again, and people are talking about it. So I want to give you another quote from David Rockefeller that occurred on September 23rd, 1994, and I quote, "This present window of opportunity, during which a truly peaceful and interdependent world order might be built, will not be open for too long." In other words, we've only got a certain size window of opportunity. "We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the New World Order." So what is he saying? Something that we've known for a very long time. And that is, you can't just go right out there and the people and say these things. It's something that you got to slowly introduce to the culture, just a little bit at a time. That's the way it works. And so in order for your plans to be put into fruition, you've got to let the people think that it's for their own good that you're doing these things. That we're doing these things to protect you from, a virus, an attack from another nation, terrorists, a kid down the block coming into McDonald's with a gun and blowing you all the way. We got to do all these things, and these are realistic things. That all these things are coming against you. In New York right now, we need to protect you from drinking sodas, the big sodas, the big Diet or the big Cokes and things like that. As a matter of fact, I think Diet Cokes are okay. So we present the idea that obesity is the biggest problem. It's costing us gazillions of tax dollars, which is the reason why we've got to put the Obama healthcare thing into fruition, and we've got to do all these things because people determining how much they want to eat or what is killing us. And this is the reason why we're going to have to get rid of all these government things and so forth. We got to get rid of our military and so forth, and we can't have tours in the White House, whatever. We can't do any of these things because we've got obese people running around the country drinking all these big, huge Cokes and so forth and these monsters and things like that. And so we've got to outlaw these things because we can't have people determining these things themselves. And so we got to, for their own good, we are passing this law in which you can no longer have a soft drink that's more than 16 ounces. How absurd. But this is just a microcosmic view of how the mighty ones and the powers that be work in this world. So we've got to convince you first that we're doing all these things to protect you from yourself. Since you can't seem to do it on your own, we've got to do things to protect you. Well, the only way that that's going to happen is you've got to create all these crises in the world in order to have the foundation for passing these laws for your own good. And so people have to be led to the emotional brink. We have to be led to the emotional cliff of we just can't take it anymore. I can't stand this violence with the guns and et cetera and so forth happening now. And so we're cause the people to scream out, do whatever you have to do. Do whatever it takes. Protect us. Take care of us. Watch over us. This is what we see over and over and over from the beginning, because as it was then is the way it is now as well. You've got to protect us from ourselves. And so you create a crisis and then you run in and solve the crisis. That's essentially what David Rockefeller just said. We had one of our great political leaders in this country say something to the effect of that when a crisis comes, we can't waste it. We can't waste a good crisis. So these are kind of little buzzwords that come out there all the time that they used to put behind closed doors. And now they put them out right out there in the open so everybody can hear them and everybody can see them. It's no longer behind closed doors. It's like the subtle beast of the field. It's right out in the open. So when our government leaders come on the TV and they say, these 57 United States, which I mean, these 50, okay, that's not a mistake. That's not a slip of the tongue. When our government leaders and the wives of our government leaders come on TV and they say that, we're going to go back and we're going to go to Kenya and visit the homeland of the president. Whoops. Okay. Or when our leaders say something like my Muslim faith, my Christian faith, those are not accidents. That's the MO these days. Put it right out there in the open. And if anybody addresses those issues, you're the same one that believes that Pete Rose took out John F. Kennedy. That's how it works. And that's how it's always worked. So that's why these presidents have said these things from the very beginning, because this is very well-known MO on how to accomplish these things is create a big crisis, once again, and then rush in to solve the crisis. In Wikipedia, I want to quote from Wikipedia once again. It says, and I quote, "The common theme in conspiracy theories about a new world order is that a secretive power elite with a globalist agenda is conspiring to eventually rule the world through an authoritarian world government which replaces sovereign nation states and an all-encompassing propaganda that ideologizes, I think I've got that word right, its establishment in the culmination of history's progress." So they understand that this is the truth. This is the reality of what's going on, because these very powerful men have said the same thing all along that we're saying now, only gets put in the bucket of conspiracy theories and lumped in with all these other goofy kind of things. So there's no differentiation. There's no discerning between the two. And so I hope so far, as we have a little bit to go in this series, that I presented a case of why I believe that these fallen angels are not mating with the daughters of men, but they're mighty ones ruling the earth for greed and power and taking things over, and always have been. So we will continue with Sons of God Giants and the New World Order. Until we meet next time, cling to your roots that your days may be long, and remember that God is smarter than we are. Shalom.
Want more Brad Scott? Get his new series, Frequently Asked Questions, covering Colossians, Romans, clean foods, and more. Now available on DVD at HebraicRootsNetwork.com.